The evening started as usual. My wife Bethany and I arrived at Jake's house, a little excited about the upcoming meeting. It was one of those parties he threw once a month, gathering friends and acquaintances under the roof of his luxurious country house. Bethany looked amazing. Her white dress, tightly fitting her slender figure, seemed to attract the gazes of men. She has always been able to make an impression, and today was no exception. I couldn't help but notice the special sparkle in her eyes when she smiled at others. She was in her element. Jake, the host of the evening, came up to us with a big smile. We had known each other for a long time, and I knew his habits, but there was something wrong with his behavior today. It's like he's up to something. It's great that you came, Jake said, lightly touching Bethany's shoulder. His gesture looked casual, but there was an excessive intimacy in it that did not escape my attention. Bethany laughed softly, and her laughter echoed around the room, drawing the eyes of the other guests to us. I felt something inside me tense up. Maybe it was just my imagination, but Jake and Bethany exchanged a brief glance, which seemed strange to me. I tried to drive away disturbing thoughts, blaming the situation and its atmosphere for everything. Soon the guests were seated in the living room, filling it with a noise of conversation and laughter. Jake took on the role of host, as always, controlling the course of the evening. He was a master at creating an atmosphere, light, relaxing, but at the same time saturated with hidden energy that it was impossible not to feel. When the conversation started to die down, Jake suggested playing. It was one of those casual entertainments that he often came up with at his parties. The game was supposed to interest the guests, engage them in communication, and, as it seemed, remain on the verge of innocent flirtation. But this time I felt something strange. There was something hidden in his offer that I didn't immediately understand. The game started with simple questions and tasks. But soon the tone changed. Jake made the next offer with the same carelessness, but I noticed that his gaze settled on Bethany. "Bethany, why don't you sit on my lap?" he said with a smile. The hall froze for a moment. I felt something tighten in my chest. All eyes were on her, but her expression remained unreadable. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze sliding over my face as if seeking permission or support, but I didn't have time to say anything. With a slight smile, she took a step forward and, as if this was the most natural action in the world, sat down on Jake's lap. There was a tense silence in the hall, but soon it was broken by general laughter. One of the guests made a joke, and it diffused the situation. However, this was the first alarm call for me. I saw Jake put his arm around Bethany's waist, and she leaned a little closer to him. It was too intimate, too much, close, which annoyed me. The game continued. With each new assignment, the tone became more provocative, and I noticed that Bethany was starting to behave differently than usual. Her smile became more playful, her movements became more free. She stopped being shy and began to participate in the game with a boldness that I hadn't noticed in her before. Jake seemed fascinated by her behavior. I watched as his hand, seemingly by accident, touched her thigh, and his gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. I wanted to intervene, but the atmosphere was relaxed for everyone and the words stuck in my throat. At some point, when Bethany needed to do something on another assignment that, by my standards, was beyond the bounds of what was allowed, she looked back at me. Her eyes shone with a strange gleam, in which excitement and a thrill of joy were mixed. At that moment, I realized that my wife was hiding something from me, and now she stopped controlling her hidden desires. I was on the verge of intervening and giving her a hard time, and even more so Jake, but the desire to understand how far she would go with him held me back. I watched her every move, feeling a strange mixture of jealousy, fear, and an incomprehensible premonition of doom grow in me. The game continued. The evening reached its climax. The atmosphere in the hall was heating up by the minute, and the tension that I felt from the very beginning became almost unbearable. The Bethany I knew seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a woman I barely recognized. She was the center of attention, her movements were confident, and there was a mixture of excitement and something else in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. She was at the mercy of this game, and I felt that she was ready to go to any lengths not to get out of it. Jake, as an experienced conductor, directed everything that was happening. His voice sounded restrained but confident, and every word he uttered carried a hidden meaning. He suggested the next task, and it immediately threw me off balance. "Bethany," he began, looking at her with the same confident smile, "kiss John." He nodded towards one of the guests, a tall, dark-haired man with a smirk on his face. The hall froze. All eyes were on Bethany, waiting for her reaction. I saw her tense up internally, but her face remained impenetrable. She held her breath for a split second, her gaze darted in my direction, as if seeking confirmation or support, but I stood paralyzed, unable to say or do anything. Bethany took a step forward, her movements slow and determined. I saw her approach John, her breathing quickened, and her face turned slightly pale. She stopped in front of him, her hands trembling, but she raised her head and looked him straight in the eyes. For a moment, the room was deathly silent. She leaned forward slowly, and their lips touched. The kiss was long, too long. It wasn't just a touch of lips, it was an act steeped in passion and provocation. John put his hands on her waist, pulling her closer, and I saw Bethany, frozen for a moment, succumb to this movement. Their kiss deepened, and I felt something inside me tearing apart. The room seemed to explode when the other guests started applauding and laughing, but I couldn't share their fun. When Bethany pulled away, her face was tense, but the same strange fire was still burning in her eyes. She quickly returned to her seat, but I could see that this action had changed her. Jake seemed pleased with her reaction, and there was a hint of satisfaction in his smile. But he wasn't going to stop there. "Great, Bethany," he said with a slight grin. "Now let's do something bolder. How about taking off your blouse?" At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just a task, it was a step towards breaking down all barriers, and I knew that if Bethany agreed, there would be no turning back. She froze for a moment, her eyes meeting mine again. I saw her struggling with herself, trying to make a decision. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she didn't back down. As if in slow motion, she slowly reached for the buttons on her blouse. The first button was undone, then the second. Every move she made was like a blow to my heart. She was unbuttoning button after button, and I could see her breathing quicken, her cheeks turn red. Finally, the last button was undone, and the blouse gently slipped off her shoulders, revealing a lace bra. She stood in front of everyone, slightly hunched over, but with her head up, and her face expressed a mixture of embarrassment and determination. The hall was filled with cheers again, but I felt that something was wrong. Bethany had taken a step towards the point of no return, and I didn't know what to do next. Jake smiled again, and I knew he was going to continue. "Excellent, Bethany," he said with a note of admiration in his voice. "And now to add spice. Kiss John again, but this time more passionately." Bethany didn't move. I saw her face turn pale, but the same strange determination still burned in her eyes. She realized that this was no longer just a game. It was more than that, and she seemed ready to go all the way. She slowly approached John again. This time, her movements were less confident, but still determined. She stopped in front of him, and he pulled her back to him, this time more confidently. Their kiss was deep, almost rough, and I felt my insides turn over. When the kiss was over, Bethany returned to her seat, her face tense and her hands shaking. She did something she didn't intend to do, and I knew she probably didn't fully understand why herself. But Jake seemed pleased with her action. He looked at her with approval, and I felt that there was some kind of strange connection between them. When the evening came to an end, I saw that Bethany was still under the impression of what had happened. Her eyes were full of emotions that she was trying to hide, but I knew there was a storm raging inside her. We left Jake's house, and I felt that something important had disappeared from our lives. That night was the point of no return, and I didn't know what was waiting for us next. The party was over, but there was still tension in the air from a few hours ago. We drove home in complete silence, and the silence was deafening. I didn't know what to say, I didn't know how to react to what had happened. Rachel was sitting next to me, her face tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see how her hands were shaking, how she was clenching them into fists, trying to maintain at least a semblance of calm. When we got home, she silently got out of the car and headed into the house. I followed her, feeling the weight of what had happened pressing down on me, how hard it was getting to breathe. I wanted to talk to her, I wanted to ask her how she was feeling, but the words stuck in my throat. "Bethany." I started, but she didn't turn around. She silently went into the bedroom, leaving me alone in the hallway. I stood there feeling completely helpless. It was like a nightmare when you're trying to do something, but your body won't listen. I entered the bedroom and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed with her head down. Her hair fell over her shoulders, and I couldn't see her face. There was a tense silence in the room, broken only by our breathing. "Bethany, we need to talk," I said, trying to stay calm, even though everything was boiling inside. She raised her head, her eyes were full of tears, but she held them back, trying not to betray her feelings. Her voice was low, but there was bitterness in it. About what happened. About what I did. I didn't know what to say. It was a moment when all the words seemed meaningless. I came closer and sat down next to her on the bed, but she pulled away, as if there was a wall between us that I couldn't overcome. "Bethany, I don't understand what's going on with you," I said, trying to be honest. "You acted like it wasn't you." She turned to me abruptly, her eyes sparkling with pent-up emotions. "Do you think it was easy for me? Do you think this is what I wanted?" Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I didn't know what to say. Everything I wanted to say didn't seem to make sense. "Why didn't you stop me?" she asked, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. I wanted to explain that I didn't know what to do, that I was paralyzed with fear and bewilderment, but the words wouldn't come out of my mouth. I was just silent, and the silence was deafening. Bethany stood up and began to pace the room nervously, clenching and unclenching her fists. I could see a storm of emotions raging inside her that she couldn't put into words. "Jake," she began, but couldn't finish. I knew what she wanted to say, but I was afraid to hear it. Jake was the reason for all this. He was the one who guided her actions, who pushed her to what happened. "Bethany, I do not know what to say," I confessed, feeling a growing pain in my chest. "I do not know how we can fix this." She stopped and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. There was fear mixed with despair in her eyes. "I don't know myself," she finally said softly. "But I know one thing, I can't live like this anymore." These words sounded like a sentence. I felt that an insurmountable wall had really grown between us. She went to the window and peered out into the night, as if trying to find answers to her questions in the dark. At that moment, the bedroom door suddenly opened and Jake appeared on the threshold. His appearance was so sudden that I did not immediately understand what was happening. He was calm, his face showed no emotion, but there was the same hidden fire in his eyes that I saw at the party. "Jake? What are you doing here?" I asked, getting out of bed. Anger boiled up in me, but I held it back, trying to figure out what was going on. "I came to talk," he replied coldly, his gaze fixed on Bethany. She turned to him abruptly, her face turned pale, and I saw her clenching her fists. "What should I talk about?" Her voice was strained like a string. Jake took a step forward, his voice was quieter, but there was steel in it. "Bethany, you know what I'm talking about. It's not over yet." I didn't understand what was going on, but deep down I felt it had something to do with what happened at the party. Jake has been manipulating us all this time, but now he has come to take the last step. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Jake turned to me, his gaze filled with contempt. "I need what Bethany has already started. She took the first step, and now she needs to finish." I felt like everything inside me turned upside down. It was an ultimatum. Jake wanted Bethany to completely submit to his will. Everything that happened at the party was just the beginning. "Bethany," he said, not taking his eyes off her, "you know what you need to do. You've already started this game, and now you need to finish it." Bethany stood as if paralyzed. I saw her face turn even paler and her hands tremble. She knew that if she retreated now, there would be no turning back. But I could see that she was on edge, that she didn't know what to do. "Bethany, you don't have to do this," I said, taking a step toward her. But she pulled away, her eyes filled with horror. Jake kept pushing her. "You've already gone too far to stop. You know you're doing the right thing." At that moment, I realized that I had to do something. This was the moment when it was necessary to act to save Bethany, to bring her back. I took a step forward, ready to step between them, but Bethany suddenly raised her hand to stop me. "Don't, John," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "It's my choice." I froze in disbelief. She was going to take this step herself. She was ready to go all the way to the end. Jake came closer, putting his hands on her shoulders. I saw her close her eyes, trying to cope with the inner storm. Jake bent down and whispered something in her ear, and I saw her face contort with inner pain. And suddenly she abruptly opened her eyes and looked at me. There was something new in her gaze that I hadn't noticed before. It was the look of a man who had made a decision, but it was a bitter decision. "John," she began, but her voice was shaking. She didn't have time to finish. At that moment, Jake abruptly pulled away from her, as if he understood something. His face turned pale. She refused to play by Jake's rules, refused to obey his will. I saw in her eyes a determination that seemed to have been lost in the course of this terrible game. Jake, noticing the change in her behavior, took a step back. He was no longer the confident man who had been playing this game from the beginning. Now he looked confused, as if he didn't understand how things had turned out this way. His face contorted with a sudden realization that he had lost control. "What are you doing, Bethany?" he hissed in a trembling voice. "You can't just stop." Bethany looked at me again, her gaze full of a calmness I hadn't seen in her for a long time. She took another step towards me, and I felt my heart lighten. She chose me, chose our marriage, despite everything that happened. "No, Jake, this is the end," she said softly but firmly. "I won't play your games anymore." I saw Jake clench his fists, and his face was red with rage. He couldn't believe that everything was falling apart right in front of his eyes, that his plan had failed. But there was nothing more he could do. He had lost his hold on Bethany. "You can't do this," he shouted, but there was desperation in his voice. "You've already gone too far." "It was a mistake," Bethany replied, not taking her eyes off him. "But I'm not going to let you destroy everything I have." I saw Jake slowly lower his arms, his shoulders hunched, as if he had finally realized his defeat. He stared at us in silence, his eyes filled with hatred, but he couldn't say anything else. "Go away, Jake," I said, stepping forward and putting myself between him and Bethany. I thought for a moment that he was going to object, but then his face changed again. He looked at me with the same disdain that I had seen at the party, but there was no longer the power in his gaze that he had possessed before. "You're going to regret this," he said in a low and ominous voice, but without confidence. Jake turned around and left the room, leaving us in tense silence. When the door closed behind him, I turned to Bethany. She stood with her head down, her shoulders shaking with pent-up emotions. "Bethany," I began, but I didn't know what to say. She looked up at me and I saw tears running down her cheeks. "John, I'm so sorry," she whispered in a trembling voice. "I do not know how we were able to get this far." I came closer and hugged her, feeling the tension inside me gradually go away. She rested her head on my chest, and I heard her breathing become calmer. "We'll manage," I said, feeling a new hope flare up in me. "Bethany doesn't." She didn't answer, but I knew she understood. We stood there for a few minutes, feeling the silence around us become less oppressive, and her heart beat in time with mine. At that moment, I realized that it wasn't just a battle with Jake, it was a battle for us, for our future. Bethany had made her choice, and now I knew that we would cope with any difficulties. This evening, despite everything that happened, was the beginning of something new. Jake couldn't control our lives anymore. We had regained what we had lost, and now we had a chance to start all over again, without his shadow that overshadowed our existence. When we finally drifted apart, I looked into Bethany's eyes and saw in them the woman I once loved. She was strong, but vulnerable, and now I knew that together we could overcome everything. We left the room, leaving all our fears and doubts behind. This evening has changed us, but it has also given us strength that we did not even know we could find in ourselves. It was the beginning of a new stage in our lives, a life that we decided to live together, no matter what. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.